sighted.
I got a couple of hinds moving up the valley. Good kill.
Fire 3, cover left flank.
Watch the ground fire, 2-7.
Roger that.
No, it's not this one. But this one is pretty cool too. So, it's been 19 years since the last game release of NUKKLEAR's IP, Comanche, and now in early access since early 2020 for both single-player and multiplayer play, but Nuclear Minds and THQ Nordic is simply just named Comanche. So, after these 19 years of absence since the last game, Comanche 4 from NUKKLEAR, that now includes a modern game engine, a strong backbone of developer support, and lessons learned on designing previous games of their own, least to say, there are some improvements to be made. To start, the heads-up display is very clean, utilizing a thin and clear square typeface and single pixel drop shadow for the center-mounted information, including the speedometer and altimeter, Comanche and drone health bars, artificial horizon, and aiming cursors. However, the options only leave these at white and nothing else. This poses a really bad case of not being able to see your most critical data in environments with no way to change it. Environments include snow, heavy clouds, looking towards the sun in combat that leave you with the least amount of data when it is most critical to the player. The placement of these health bars on either side of the screen are also very appropriate, being nice and tall without blocking line of sight and moving with your tracking. The issue with this is, and this cannot be understated, is the contrast between your current health, the health bar background, and the environment. At a currently rated contrast ratio between the white of the actual bar itself and, say, the blue sky with the 50% opacity bar background, the contrast ratio is a measly 1.47 to 1. By far one of the least readable combinations for text or information for something as valuable as your health bar is a huge deal and will be addressed later on. Stylistically, it looks quite nice, but this is by far one of the largest improvements that needs to be made for readability in the game. A simply put artificial horizon that works as advertised. A lack of degree markers like previous Comanche games or other arcade flight sims such as Ace Combat is a small lack of information for optimizing speed angles or when having to correct some maneuvers and get a reference angle. Otherwise, a perfectly functional piece without being intrusive towards the player. A simple and usable cursor unique to the cannons for each model of the Comanche, primarily consisting of a center screen dot with additional markers outlining the current spread of the rotary cannons, scatter gun, light cannon for Eve, or charge level of the Horizon's railgun. Placed down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, these are nicely separated from the environment and the cockpit using a semi-transparent gray plate and thin white vector assets to represent each of the components that make up your weapons and countermeasures. Primary weapons such as the rotary cannons include a heat level in bright red that climb up the side of the weapon until full that then starts an overheat that requires cooldown as clearly stated within the box, or reloading type weapons such as the railgun clearly state your current, maximum, and reloading state of the weapon, a very classically designed style of FPS ammunition management that best suits functions of the Comanche models that they're placed in. Similarly done are the tacticals and countermeasures of each of the Comanche models. listed in distinct boxes that maintain the show inputs above all of the Comanche models, and using the similarly used thin vector assets that are separated using the gray backplates. All considered, these are the best design assets in the game at the moment, allowing for great contrast from designs and information in the cockpit and terrain. Map and radar are combined into a single circular dial, opposite of the weapons and countermeasures, using a similarly used dark gray and white palette, utilizing threats in solid red with icons for boats, land vehicles, and helicopters, but done in a very disadvantageous way. White cursor on lightly contrasting grays, and dark gray background to show terrain map depth with a 150 meter radius is very difficult to read terrain to any meaningful degree. This reminds me very heavily of Ace Combat 7's terrain map, but harder to see, yet having a higher degree of detail, paradoxically. Again, the issue primarily comes down to the poor contrast given to the pilots, especially with potentially advantageous terrain players could use to utilize within matches, especially since you cannot look through the cockpit if using simulation controls. In addition to the lack of detail, out-of-bounds indicators are really not visible, as it is just another gray crosshatch on top of everything else that is already gray, and they don't work in multiplayer. By far, map and radar needs the most effort put into fix. For myself, as an enjoyer of the simulator flight model in this game, there is a very large variance in quality of Comanche interiors to look out of that can greatly influence your visibility towards the outside world, including how you navigate and fight in it. With that said, both Prototype and Rhino by far have the worst cockpit visibility, featuring very high sitting console mounts and a very cagey interior feel that makes tracking targets very awkward, especially when terrain gets involved. While other models such as Horizon and Ghost offer great visibility throughout the canopy, and Eva's not too far off. The entire point of this is that when an enemy is traveling below you, when you have an advantageous position upon your opponent, you are effectively putting yourself at a disadvantage by only seeing the red outline body of your target and nothing else. And this disappears if your target happens to go behind terrain, which you also cannot see. All while your enemy, looking up at you, can clearly see you. And specifically on the point of terrain, it makes maneuvers such as this very awkward without having your own drone as a personal spotter. So, now that I've gone over the choices of Nuclear Mind's construction of the current state of Comanche's UI and HUD in both positive and critical criticism, I think that is only fair that while evaluating things that I offer my own suggestions towards the developers in an effort to help improve the game for the future, and also explain my reasonings as to why. First off, the heads-up display. Currently, the choice of only having the hairline style of font makes it rather difficult to see sometimes, even with the drop shadow. So I will propose that as an option in the main menu, having the option between hairline and regular style of font for the typeface would be a great option to have, as you can keep the current classic style of the hairline font, or go for regular if you want something that is easier to read. This would help with just general accessibility for the game. Number 2. Location of enemy and friendly black boxes should be visible at all times during the match from the heads-up display. Currently, having only a very small and thin light pillar for the black boxes themselves during a match is very, very poor visibility for them. Being able to see them similar to kill confirmed dog tags in Call of Duty, would being able to hunt them down be far more enjoyable, as everyone be able to see them and even guard points around the map for strategic use. And here is a quick mock-up representation of what these black box dog tags would look like in a game of Comanche. Number 3. Rhino. We don't need an individual reload sound for every shot. Just use an overheat system with a low heat up and a fast cooldown. That is all we need, please and thank you. Number 4. Allow for presets of the heads-up display to allow for very high contrast coloration. This is a carryover from the previous Comanche titles such as Comanche Gold, where using only the H hotkey, you could cycle between very high visibility colors for your heads-up display information, from white, lime, yellow, or key black. Similarly done was the recent arcade flight game that came out, Project Wingman, that allows the player to choose from several preset colors for the heads-up display right from the main menu for both third and first person. Considering that both these games do run on the Unreal Engine, implementing this shouldn't be any sort of huge deal for the development team. And Project Wingman is also an indie game, so there could be some really nice cross-pollination between these two titles specifically for accessibility purposes. Tanks in Nuclear Comanche are not labeled correctly at all. In fact, tanks are actually anti-air lightly armored vehicles similar in function to the Russian Tunguska and not a main battle tank like the Russian T-90 or the American M1 Abrams. Or, let's talk about the truck, which is not simply a light personnel carrier that maybe has supplies with it. It is in fact an anti-air SAM launcher platform similar in function to the Patriot launcher. And both of these can quickly tear a first-timer to shreds and leave them in utter confusion as to what the hell happened, because these are not labeled correctly in their function. Properly naming these vehicle threats to, say, anti-air tank or SAM launcher would be very well suited for this purpose, as well as adding actual main battle tanks and proper covered trucks to actually fill the role. These were done perfectly fine in the older Comanche games, and there's no reason why it cannot continue here as well. Health bar for the player needs to be more visible and have a higher contrast from the literal bar values and separated from the rest of the game space. As a first, I propose as a similar effect for the enemy health bars, adding a box around the full bar of the player's health bar for both the Comanche and the drone. Second, drop the current background 50% opacity white entirely. It needs to go. Let the health bar value stand alone against the rest of the game space, and simply sit inside the container that will be the health bar box, as we'll call it. And this will assist in for the next fix. Number 3. Add percentage health values for both the Comanche and the drone health bars, showing their current health from 100% to 0%. This can simply be placed where the hover mode sits, and not only will this be far more direct for the player to see how much health their model is sitting at any given moment, but will also be able to use to test damage models for weapons in the future, with assisting balance adjustments. And these changes will lead to the next suggestion as well. Number 4. The health bars should change color to show how much damage is taken. Adding in color changes to the health bar itself, depending on where your current health is sitting at, is a very easy and important way to assist the pilot to actually ask, how dead am I right now in a combat scenario? I have suggested going from the base HUD color, which is currently used, white, to yellow between 70 and 31% health values, and then red at 30 to 0. This is both a legacy from the previous Comanche games and more recently Ace Combat or say Project Wingman, as they also put a huge amount of pressure onto the player in a very similar way as Nuclear Comanche. This does, however, mean that missile and drone alerts will need to be adjusted slightly, but this will likely not be a huge change all in all. The contrast of the minimap, just like health bar values, is just way too low for general use amongst terrain. The base level for most maps, assumed to be water, to the highest peak on the flight practice map is a contrast ratio of 1.49 to 1, another failure. A way to adjust this would simply do a contrast pass on the minimap, simply darken the lowest points to near black, and heighten the highest points to something that is a bit closer to white, or at least in the half-gray area. This would allow for easier spotting on the map for tight or hidden locations to fly into without impeding on the player's drone, friendlies, or spotted enemies' visibility to stand out amongst the minimap. Number 2. Out of Bounds needs to be properly displayed on the minimap clearly for both multiplayer and single player. Instead of the gray crosshatch style that's currently being used, the crosshatch style can still be used, but with a much more visible color, such as yellow or orange, to make it immediately visible to the player where the flight corridor available to them is, and this would be especially useful on the single-player mission Operation Thunderflash, with its extremely tight flight corridors and ceiling available to the player to maneuver around in. And also, fixing the minimap out of bounds for multiplayer is actually really important. There's a lot of weird campy stuff that you could do out there on some of the maps. Number 3. To assist with the alert system, a relic from Novologic's Comanche is that when an enemy that is able to fire a lock-on missile at the player, when the player is detected, a single red line from the enemy to the player will show up on the minimap, indicating that they are detected and currently being targeted and locked on by an enemy. This gives the player time to either terrain mask amongst other terrain around them, break lock, or run away, or engage head-on to destroy them before a lock can be acquired. I feel that this could be actually implemented into NUKKLEAR's Comanche fairly well, as there will be one caveat tied to this. If the enemy has not been spotted by the player, or the player's allies that is currently being targeted, the standard alert will simply show up instead. With how missile locking works in this game, an alert ring that is similar to how battlefield lock threats work would be more appropriate, so that the pilot is always clearly aware of the state of threat that is coming towards him both visually and audibly. The difference between an enemy locking, acquiring a lock, and missile fired should be distinct so that the player is always ready to countermeasure appropriately with either flares or smoke. And this can be easily demonstrated by overlaying battlefield audio with, say, this clip here.
Enemy helicopter spotted.
Since the entire point of the technology of both the Comanche and the Apache is to allow the gunner to look around at all angles and track targets using their helmet, effectively allowing full visibility of the battlefield that is ahead of them, why not let the player allow them to do the same thing?
In the nose of the Comanche is a sophisticated second-generation FLIR, or forward-looking infrared system. Two independent external inputs are swiveled to follow the head movements of the pilot and co-pilot, feeding information directly to their helmet-mounted displays, or HMDs. An advanced software system integrates data from both a night vision system and FLIR to paint a highly accurate picture of the outside field of view, even in the darkest night.
Essentially, when you use the free look mode inside of your Comanche, wherever you look culls out a set field of view from the interior of the Comanche to be able to see the actual terrain that is around you. This would allow for the freedom of full control flying and precise aiming of simulation, while keeping the ease of control and third-person situational awareness that is available to you as an arcade flyer, and thus no players are at a disadvantage because of their flight model. As I present this to you, the YouTube audience, I have also forwarded all this criticism towards NUKKLEAR themselves for evaluation and potentially future implementation into the Comanche game. Alright, just a quick word in post here. A new development from NUKKLEAR in the official Comanche Discord. There will be a new developer taking over the role of developing Comanche from here on out. We do not know what the current developer will be from here on out, but I suppose we will find out later after the Prodigal Reaper update has been in full circle for a little bit. So, new news on that in the future, I suppose. And if you are one of the players of this Comanche game, Please also let the devs know what your thoughts of this game are. They are very vigilant on their Discord server, which I have linked down below. I myself am active there with a few other folks that actually like to get around and play every so often, and just getting more players into this game that want to stick around will always be good. I genuinely love the game flow of this game. The flight mechanics are fluid, they're nice and snappy, and I want more people to experience it and have a good time playing. And I hope that in the future I can assist with that by doing a new player guide, so other people that are coming in can have an easier time than I did. And speaking of playing this game, you yourself can pick up Comanche for both multiplayer and single player for $20 Canadian on Steam, or you can play the multiplayer module for free, as you get modes of infiltration and black box with it. Otherwise, if you have any comments or critiques on this video, as this is my first endeavor in doing a commentary and critique style, please feel free to leave a comment down below, like or dislike as you see fit. I hope this video was informative to both the audience and the developers, and until then, I'll see you guys later. Take care.